أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وآله الطاهرين. Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters, and welcome to another session of Mizan Live covering different aspects of Islamic thought. I hope everyone is well. This is the last session we're having in March, and after this week, inshallah, we're going to move on to April. Inshallah, to know which of us are going to have sessions in April, how many sessions, please just look out for the flyer that we're going to be putting out soon for the April sessions. I know that Sheikh Mahdi might be doing a couple less sessions in the coming month. I'll probably be doing all of the Wednesdays of the upcoming month, meaning the month of April. Assalamu alaikum to everyone who's joining us, and thanks for tuning in. So let us go over last week's articles very quickly before we get into today's lesson. So last week we started with article 38, of the book Doctrines of Shia Islam. In article 38, Ayatullah Subhani, he starts talking about, from article 38 onwards rather, he starts talking about Sifatul Fi'l of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, stuff that we've explained before, talked about before, and most of you knew about more or less, even before these sessions. So, Sifatul Fi'l, those attributes of God's divine action. I'm not going to go over the description of that anymore. I think we've repeated it enough. There are three things he discusses in this chapter, which is made up of 3 articles. This chapter has 3 articles in it, if I'm not mistaken, which is article 38 to 41, if I'm not mistaken. One second, excuse me. Yeah. What I have here is, articles 38, 39, 40, 41. Yeah. So these 3 articles. So this chapter is made up of 3 articles. Now, each article speaks about one of 3 of the divine attributes of God that have to do with divine action. And assalamu alaikum to the rest of you who are joining and saying salam. Article 38 talks about God's words, God's speech, and I discussed that in depth last week. We know that the Quran talks about this. He brought a verse, Ayatullah Subhani, Surah Shura, verse 51, where he talks about how God speaks. So we all know God speaks to people sometimes, but how? That was the question that we had. How? So he explained, according to the verse, Surah Shura, verse 51, it was either through wahi, revelation, or inspiration, min wara'i hijab, from behind a veil, and that was explained last week as well. Aw yursila rasulan, or he sends a messenger or an agent, an angel, to come down. Okay, so that was how God speaks. So the closest you'll get to speech actually in these 3 is the second one, min wara'i hijab, from behind a veil. In other words, a voice or sound is made and words are said, but not through a mouth. Not that God has a mouth. What rather is happening is that God is making this voice or sound, and meanings are put across to the person, the addressee of those words. Like in Prophet Musa's case, we all know about the story of Prophet Musa and how Allah kind of quote unquote spoke with him. That's the closest you'll get to actual human speech when it comes to God. Min wara'i hijab, from behind a veil. But there was an explanation there too. It doesn't mean that God has a voice, doesn't mean that God has a mouth. And there were some hadiths as well that I think we covered. Now, that was one meaning of kalamullah, or the speech of God. We also had another interpretation of kalamullah, kalimatullah. And over there, it wasn't about speech, it was about God's action and what God does. And that how God, whatever He does, is a sign of Him. In other words, hence, it is an action, it is a kalima of Him. Because the kalima and word is a sign of the person speaking that word. So in that sense, it's a sign, and everything that has been created is a sign of Allah. And then this famous verse of Surah Kahf, verse 109, that if the sea was to be ink, and the trees were to be pens, the kalimat of Allah couldn't be written. And Allama Tabatabai explained in his tafsir that here kalimat and words doesn't mean actual words that God speaks. If we were to transcribe them, we won't have enough room, or paper, or ink, or pens to do it. No. He said what is meant here is anything, any object that has been created, anything that has existence is a kalimatullah. So we had two interpretations for kalamullah, kalimatullah, speech of God. One of these two, either it is through a veil, from behind a veil, through inspiration/revelation, or through sending a messenger, meaning an angel. That was one interpretation. Another interpretation is that kalima, when we say kalamullah, it means the things that Allah has created. So khalqullah, in other words. Both of them, in both of their interpretations, will be attributes and qualities of God's action, not God's essence, God's action, because He has to do them, He has to bring them about. Alright, and then we moved on to Article 39. Since we were talking about the word of God, the speech of God, and so on, we had a problem, and that was Mihnatul Quran, the Inquisition of the Quran. As I said and I explained before, there was a little history here, that during the time of some of the Abbasid Khalifas, there was a whole theological discussion. Is the Quran qadim or is it hadith? Is the Quran something that is created, or is it something that was eternal and was always there from the beginning? There was no time that the Quran didn't exist. For you and I, this might seem like not a very important discussion, but back then people got in big trouble for not believing in the fact that the Quran is hadith, something that was created and didn't exist all the time. And the Khalifas, some Khalifas would push for it until Mutawakkil came into power and eventually stopped this. Anyway, there was a history to that. Mihnatul Quran. Ayatullah Subhani, he says, look, we can solve the problem very easily. When we talk about the speech of God and the words of God, we can tell if this word of God, whether it's the Quran or anything else, is hadith or qadim, is something that was created and didn't exist before, or wasn't eternal with God, or was eternal from the beginning. And when I say eternal, of course, it's for lack of better words. Eternal means something that never dies, never ends, in the future. I'm talking about from the beginning it was there. So anyway, he says, look, if what you mean by Quran is the book of the Quran and the words that are in it, one. Or two, if you mean the words that Angel Jibreel brought down to the Holy Prophet, two. Or three, what you mean by Quran is the concepts and meanings and those kinds of things, and the stories that you have in the Quran regarding the prophets and their stories. If any of these three is meant by the Quran, that means the Quran is going to be hadith, because these are things that have to be created. They weren't there from the beginning. The prophets weren't there from the beginning. Their stories weren't there from the beginning, right? But if what you mean by Quran is God's knowledge of what will be in the Quran, then yeah, it's something that's qadim. It was always there because it has to do with God's knowledge, not with other things. Anyway, that's a long story, and we kept it short even last week because it's not too important in my opinion. This is something that is in classical theology. You'll find the debate of Mihnatul Quran. We're going to move on. He just mentions this in passing because we were talking about the word of God, and the biggest word of God is the Quran. So he just felt that it's befitting just to insert that into the book, in this part of the book. Okay, so that was one attribute of action, one of the sifatul fi'l of God, the speech of God. And then you had sidq, the truthfulness or always being right. And we talked about that. If someone's not going to be truthful, it's because either they're mistaken or they're lying, both of which have their roots in deficiencies. A person who lies or a person who makes mistakes, and that's so as a result you can't call them someone who is truthful, then this person, the mistake they're making or the lie that they're committing is rooted in a deficiency they have. Either they are ignorant, or they are in need, or they are in trouble and in danger, and that's why they have to do things like this. All of which do not apply to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, Allah is as-sadiq, the one who is truthful and is always right, not wrong, not mistaken. Because He has knowledge and He has power. Nothing can force Him, nothing can get Him in trouble, nothing can endanger Him. And He's not ignorant as a result to make mistakes either. So that's the sidq of Allah. So that's another one of the sifatul fi'l, one of the attributes of action of God. That when He speaks or when He says something, then He is right about it. Either right, He's right and truthful about it. Wa alaikum assalam, sisters who are joining us, and brothers. Alright, the last sifatul fi'l that was discussed was hikmah of Allah, the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So wisdom can have different meanings. What He defines wisdom as, He gave it two parts. Number one, He says that whatever Allah does is done in the best form. Number one. Number two, in the best way possible. Number two is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He does things, they are purposeful. They're not in vain. They're not just for nothing. Yeah, there's a purpose behind them. So what He does is purposeful and in the best way, and is done in the best way possible for that action. That is wisdom. A person who is wise makes sure to do things in a purposeful way and in the best manner. Okay, and I gave examples of how people who are not wise, they will do things that are not purposeful sometimes, or they will do things that are purposeful, but they're not done in the best way to secure the interests of the person doing them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, none of this applies to Him either. He is the all-wise. That means He will never do something that goes against these two main pillars of wisdom. For that, He brought two verses of the Quran, and He also brought rational argumentation as well. He brought that. So for the verses, He said, look at the verse that says, Sun Allah alladhi atqana kulla shay. This is the creation of God, the one whom made everything in the most perfect manner. So that proves, according to the Quran, that when He does something, He'll do it in the best way. To prove that He doesn't do things in vain and everything He does is purposeful, مَا خَلَقْنَا السَّمَاءَ وَالْأَرْضِ وَمَا بَيْنَهُمَا بَاطِلًا. We did not create the sky and the earth and whatever's in between them in vain, batilan, in falsehood. No. Everything has a purpose for it. There's a reason for it. It's not batil. It has to do with truth. So that was Quranic proof that whatever He does is in line with wisdom. But then He also brought a rational argument as well. He said, listen, if we have proven from before and have concluded from before that God is ultimate perfection, when something is ultimate perfection, we have to understand that sometimes people, they are mistaken about when it comes to their understanding of ultimate perfection. If we understand what perfection is, you can only expect things that are done by this perfect entity to be perfect as well, or in the most perfect manner that they can be in. So that's his rational argument. He says Allah is wise. Why? Because wisdom had these two pillars in its definition. And since He is all perfection, you can be sure that these two pillars of the definition of wisdom will be secured in everything that He does. Okay, alhamdulillah. That is so far. Those were three of the sifatul fi'l of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He moves on and he closes the chapter of as-sifat al-thubutiyya, the positive actions or the affirmative qualities, of God. The affirmative qualities, those qualities that can be attributed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He closes the chapter there, which were, of course, these qualities were two parts as we discussed. Some were sifatul dhat and some were sifatul fi'l. Some were qualities of His essence, some were qualities of His action. Alright, closing that chapter, opening up the next chapter, and that's today's lesson. That we are talking now about the negated sifat, the negated qualities of God. When we say negated qualities of God, it doesn't mean that God has certain qualities that are negated. No, negated qualities of God means the qualities, the attributes, the characteristics that we cannot associate God with. We cannot attribute to God. Because they will lead to a deficiency somewhere in Him. Okay, so he begins by, in Article 32, he goes over what sifat as-salbiyya were, these negated sifat, these negated qualities. He says, we recalled above, or explained before, that the attributes of God can be divided into two categories, those of Jamal and those of Jalal. Those that pertain to perfection and Jamal are referred to as attributes of beauty or positive, affirmative attributes. While those that refer indirectly to God by negating what He is not, and which relate to imperfection or deficiency that we can't attribute to Him, are referred to as attributes of majesty or as negative attributes, or as I like to call them, negated attributes. Okay. What is the purpose of these negated qualities? The intention behind the formulation of negated attributes is to negate, excuse me, is to negate from the divine reality and Allah any possible susceptibility to imperfection. So we're like, be careful, don't attribute these things to Him, because if you do, we are attributing to Him deficiency, and we're afraid He is way higher than that. The intention behind the formulation of negative attributes is to negate from the divine reality any possible susceptibility to imperfection, deficiency, or inadequacy. Okay? Insofar as the divine essence is utterly self-sufficient and constitutes in itself absolute perfection, it is necessarily devoid of any attributes that derive from imperfection and dependency. So he's explaining how God is and how you cannot describe Him in any manner that would imply His imperfection or dependency. From this point of view, Muslim theologians argue that God does not have a body. Okay, so as a result of this, we can't say He has a body. So these are some examples of negated attributes. Having a body, nor is He material. He is not a locus for any other entity. What does that mean? Locus, not locust, but locus. Over here in the Farsi, I'm looking at it, it means nothing can, he can't go into something else. I guess they're trying to say that we don't believe what the Christian faith might hold. Nor is He incarnate in any other entity. Such features presuppose the imperfection and dependency proper to contingent existent entities. If we ever attribute these things to Him, then we are attributing to Him dependency, something that has to do with contingent beings, mumkin al-wujud, not wajib al-wujud, which is God. Okay, so then he moves into one of these attributes in particular and wants to discuss it in depth. Which one is it? He says, among the attributes deriving from imperfection is the capacity of being seen. The fact that God can be seen. Mar'i. In order for why is one of these attributes that are negated from Him the capacity of being seen, visibility? Why? He says, because in order to be seen, an object must fulfill the conditions of visual sense perception. If you want to be able to see something, brothers and sisters, it has to fulfill a few conditions that have to do with our senses. Okay? Such as, 1, being in a particular place. I can only see something if it's in a particular place and I look in that place, at that place. If I don't look in that direction, I won't see it anymore, right? So God has to be somewhere so that I can see Him. Being somewhere itself is a problem for God, 1. 2, being illuminated by some source. Think about it. If we want to be able to see Him, then at night, for example, when there's no light, we can't see Him anymore. In other words, there is some need here for light to be able to be seen, for God to be able to be seen, for us to be able to describe Him as something that can be seen. So that means He's in need of something here, which is impossible when it comes to Him. And 3rd, being separate in essence from the perceiving subject. Think about it. If something's within me, I can't see it anymore. It has to be outside and away from me. There has to be a distance between me and that thing to be able for it to be able to be seen. So, but when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, for example, He says, I am with you, I am in your heart, I am closer to you than the artery or the vein of your heart and your jugular vein and things like that. All of that we're going to have to put aside then. God has to be somewhere in daytime, far away from me, so I can see Him. All of these are batil, all of these are wrong. and false about God. So he can't be a being that is seen, is mar'i, is visible. Okay? So what is your reason for this? And any other reason? That was the first reason, that it leads to these deficiencies. He says that in addition, we can say that a God that can be seen, this part's important, I need you to pay attention. We can say that in addition, we can say that a God that can be seen cannot escape from the following two conditions. Number one, either the totality of its being would be visible, or a part of its being. When you want to say that God is visible, what does that mean? That means, okay, either him in his entirety is visible, or at least part of him is visible, right? It's one of these two. Okay, so what's wrong with that? He goes on and says, in the first case, when we can see him entirely, the all-encompassing divine reality would be encompassed and delimited. So that means that if God is going to be able to be perceived by us in his totality, it means that we are encompassing him in one way or the other, in any sense. That goes against him being unlimited. And God can never be encompassed. As a matter of fact, he encompasses all things. As a matter of fact, not even he encompasses all things. The Quran says his mercy encompasses all things. So a trait of his is all-encompassing, let alone his essence itself. And then you want to say, God is visible. Okay, no. So God is visible in the sense that we can see him in his entirety, for sure is wrong. What if when we say God is visible, we can see him? What if we mean a part of him can be seen? Ayatullah Subhani continues to answer this one now. He says, and in the second, right, it would consist of parts, both of which conditions are far removed from the divine reality. He says, look, if you're going to say I can see part of him and the other part of him I won't see, what you just did is broke him down into parts, and God does not have parts. God is one all-encompassing, unlimited, simple being of existence. That's all he is. Now, we don't want to get philosophical here. What does it mean that he's simple existence and none other than that? We can't get into that. But that goes against the fact that we believe, and not just Muslim theologians, but Western theologians, Western philosophers, they'll agree, at least the mainstream of them, that God is not made up of parts. Why? Because if he's made up of parts, that means he's in need of his parts, or else he won't exist anymore. Right? If he doesn't exist anymore, if he doesn't have any parts anymore, he's not going to exist. That means he's in need. That goes against him being the wajibul wujud, and how everything is dependent on him, not him being dependent on anything. In this case, if he has parts, if he's made up of parts, that means he relies on his parts, or else he won't exist. And that is dependency itself. And it goes against him being God to begin with. Okay. Now, he adds something here. It's not necessary to our discussion, but it's nice. He goes on, Ayatullah Subhani, he says, now all that we said has to do with is regarding the vision of, the vision, he says the corporeal, sensible vision, the visibility of God through our vision, through our eyes. When we say he's not visible, it means through the physical eyes that we have. Or else the eyes of the heart is a different story, he says. The eyes of the heart is a different story. Inward spiritual perception, which sees by the light of perfected faith, this is different. Not only is it possible, he says, but he says, awliyaullah have achieved that. And that is the goal of the awliyaullah, to somehow, through their connection to the unseen, through connection to the wajibul wujud himself, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself, to be able to understand him, or see him with the eyes of their heart. Of course, this is metaphorical. The heart does not have eyes. So it's talking about a cognition and ma'rifah of God in reality. And we've all heard that famous hadith by Amirul Mu'mineen, that when someone asks him, have you seen your Lord? He says, I wouldn't worship a Lord I can't see. And so the person asks, well, how do you see him? And the Imam answers, لا تدركه العيون بمشاهدة العيان ولكن تدركه القلوب بحقائق الإيمان. The way I see, or the way he can be seen, is not through the eyes and through sight and seeing, but rather the hearts are what see him. Yes. So everything that we said about God not being seen has to do with the eyes of the face, not the eyes of the heart. Now, that was an intellectual, rational argumentation for why God cannot be seen, and that one of the qualities or negated qualities of God is visibility and the capacity to be seen. In other words, the fact that he cannot be described as something that is visible. These were all rational, aqli, intellectual arguments. Now, what about the Quran? What about the Quran? Does the Quran also speak about this or not? He says, yes, the Quran also mentions here and there that he can't be seen. The verse he brings here, Surah A'raf, verse 143, says that when Prophet Musa asked Allah, "Oh Allah, Rabbi arini andur ilayk, show me yourself so I can see you." What did Allah say? قَالَ لَن تَرَانِي, you will never see me. You will never see me. So, in other words, brothers and sisters, if there's anyone on the face of the earth during Prophet Musa's time that will be able to see him, it should be Prophet Musa, right? The fact that Allah tells him that you will never see me shows that it's not possible to see him. Or else why would Allah deprive Prophet Musa of his sight, you know? Now, someone might ask though, but look, you're talking about God not being possible to see God, right? Yes. Okay. What do you do with the verses number 21 and 22 of Surah Qiyamah? وُجُوهُ يَوْمَئِذٍ نَاظِرَةٍ إِلَىٰ رَبِّهَا نَاظِرَةٍ. That day will faces be radiant, looking at their Lord. وُجُوهٌ, faces, يَوْمَئِذٍ نَاظِرَةٍ. They're very happy. These faces are happy and joyous. إِلَىٰ رَبِّهَا نَاظِرَةٍ. And they are looking at their Lord. What do you do about this verse? Yeah, Ayatullah Subhani doesn't say this, and he answers. I'll share the answer that he gives with you. But first, I want to add a little bit something that he doesn't say. First of all, brothers and sisters, the akhirah is a whole different story. We don't know how it's going to be, right? Of course, mainstream ulama, based on the Quran and many verses of the Quran, say that akhirah is going to be a material resurrection. There will be a material resurrection on Yawmul Qiyamah. But still, we don't know exactly how things are going to work there. So just discussing these verses gets a little hard at the get-go. Okay? Right from the get-go, what we have is that look, we're talking about dunya and God being visible in the dunya, in this world we live in right now. What does it mean? How does it work in the akhirah? We don't know. But anyway, we can still discuss it a little bit. You know what Ayatullah Subhani says here? He says that إِلَىٰ رَبِّهَا نَاظِرَةٍ. The tafsir of this verse doesn't mean that they're looking at their Lord necessarily. It's saying that they're looking at their Lord, meaning they are waiting. They're waiting for or looking forward to the blessings of their Lord. You know when they say you're looking to someone or looking up to someone for something, I'm looking to him for his money, right? Doesn't necessarily mean that I'm looking at him right now with my eyes physically. I might live on the other side of the world. But they'll say, you know, these people on this side of the world are looking to you for help. Looking to you means that they have hope in or looking forward to, or awaiting your assistance, your help, right? The same wording we'll have in Arabic as well. I mean, there's a lot of details regarding this verse. إِلَىٰ رَبِّهَا نَاظِرَةٍ. Some have said إِلَىٰ is what the plural of, is the word whose plural is ala, right? That's one tafsir of it. I don't want to get into details, I might confuse you more. But some say no, ila rabbiha nadira means, nadira here comes from intidar and intizar, awaiting something. Some say no, it means to look, but look forward to, etc. Lots of different interpretations here. What Ayatullah Subhani chooses to mention as tafsir of this verse here is that ila rabbiha nadira means that they are looking forward to the blessings, or looking to the blessings of their Lord, not looking at their Lord necessarily with physical eyes. This doesn't prove anything. Especially since, as I said, this is the akhirah we're talking about here. We're not talking about normal dunya. We don't know how it works, how the looking over there necessarily would work. Maybe over there even, like it says faces, but it's metaphorical of the hearts again. I don't know. Really, there's a million things you can say here. Okay, Ayatullah Subhani, you're telling us that the verse is talking about looking forward to the blessings of the Lord, right? Okay, what's your reason for it? What's your reasoning for it? Because we know, brothers and sisters, when it comes to academics or academia, we don't, just because a great individual has said something, we don't necessarily accept it right away. We have to see what their reasoning is. Now, usually those big names usually know more than us, know better than us. Yeah? And usually they'll probably be closer to the truth than us. But all in all, at the end of the day, they're not ma'soom. So, Ayatullah Subhani, what's your reasoning for it? He says, look, first of all, it says the faces are looking to the Lord. If actual looking with eyes was meant, then the Quran should have said, it should have said that the eyes are looking at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on that day. But that's not what the wording of the verse is. The wording of the verse is, the faces are looking. And this is metaphorical. Faces don't look, the eyes of the face look. So, he's kind of disproving that it's not looking with eyes. Or else it would have said the eyes are looking, not the faces are looking. Okay. Personally, I don't like that too much, but it isn't too bad of a reasoning either. I mean, it's something that's worth answering at least. Number two reason for why ila rabbiha nadira means they're looking forward to the blessing of their Lord. He says, and this one is I like this reasoning more. Those of you who've done tafsir, I've done tafsir with, will know what I'm talking about. Qarinatul muqabala is what he uses. Lots of times you can tell the meaning of something by its opposite. Okay? Sometimes it's hard to figure something out, but you see the opposite of it, you know exactly what it means. So the opposite of it will help you to understand what that thing itself, that term itself means, or what is meant by it. So here he uses this clue. He uses this clue in his favor. He says, look, as we go on through these verses, it talks about the good people. وُجُوهٌ يَوْمَئِذٍ نَاظِرَةٌ إِلَىٰ رَبِّهَا نَاظِرَةٌ. True. But then, let me see if I can pull it up actually. This is Surah Qiyamah, verse 21. Alright, so it says, وُجُوهٌ يَوْمَئِذٍ نَاظِرَةٌ إِلَىٰ رَبِّهَا نَاظِرَةٌ. It's verses 22 to 23. So the address here is wrong. I said 21, 22. It's 22, 23. وَوُجُوهٌ يَوْمَئِذٍ بَاسِرَةٌ. Which means, and some faces will be scowling on that day. Okay? And frowning on that day. Alright, so now, what happens to them? What they are expecting, تَظُنُّ أَن يُفْعَلَ بِهَا فَاقِرَةٌ. That they're expecting to be inflicted by some back-breaking punishment and chastisement. Ayatullah Subhani, he says, look, when we look at these verses, and it says wujuhun again. Wujuh means faces. Okay, so let me go through these 4 verses very quickly again for you guys. It says wujuhun, faces on that day will be, wujuh yawmadin nadira, will be in brightness of happiness. Faces will be in brightness of happiness, looking at the Lord. And faces will be frowning, that expect a very harsh chastisement to befall them. So those are the 4 verses. When we look at the verses that say, the verse that says, or those two verses that say there are frowning faces, what are those frowning faces doing? They are expecting chastisement to come. Expecting is the verb. Yeah? Expecting is the verb. Alright. So what's for sure is that eyes don't expect things, right? What is meant here that faces are expecting it means is that the people are expecting it. Okay? These people who have frowning faces are expecting punishment. So faces here is denoting people, not just the or faces actually, not the eyes in the face. If that's the case, then in the previous, if this is the opposite of that, the previous verses that talked about the good people and their faces shining, if that one was expecting bad stuff to happen to it, then this one is expecting good things to happen to it. إِلَىٰ رَبِّهَا نَاظِرَةً. Not that it's looking to its Lord, it's looking forward to the blessings. Versus the other one that is looking forward to or expecting the chastisement. I hope it's clear. I tried my best to explain it. This one, it's a little more technical, this qarina, this clue that he explains. Qarinatul muqabala. Let me read off of the book and see how good the book translates this part. It says, as a parallel. Oh, 1 second, excuse me. The book just like puts 2-3 paragraphs together and doesn't separate them. So it's hard to find exactly where. Okay, here we go. Secondly, the discourse of the surah in question refers to two groups. So what are we discussing again here, brothers and sisters? We are trying to figure out what the Quran means when it says وُجُوهٌ يَوْمَئِذٍ نَاظِرَةٌ إِلَىٰ رَبِّهَا نَاظِرَةٌ. That faces are looking to God. We want to see if this looking to God means looking with their eyes to Allah and actually seeing now a being by the name of God, or no, something metaphorical is meant here, that they are expecting the blessings of the Lord. That's what we're trying to figure out. Ayatullah Subhani said, it's they're expecting blessings of the Lord. What is his reasoning? He says, the discourse of the surah in question refers to two groups. One with bright and radiant faces, whose anticipated and expected reward is made clear by the verse, looking at their Lord. And the other group with grim and anguished faces, whose anticipated punishment is alluded to by the verse, that they know that some great disaster is about to befall them. The meaning of the second phrase is clear, that talks about the bad people. They know that some painful punishment will soon befall them, and they are dreading its imminent advent. As a parallel to the comparison between the two groups, we can make use of another aspect of the meaning of the first verse. That looking to the Lord means the same thing. That they are expecting a blessing, just like how those other ones are expecting a punishment. So looking here doesn't necessarily mean looking with the eyes. It means expecting, just like the second verse where it's talking about people expecting things, some bad things to happen. Okay. Oh, it's tough. It's really tough. These technical terms and explanations sometimes can get a little hard. Now, hopefully we got it across. Brother is asking, so everything is metaphorical in the Quran, he says. We just covered one verse. We just covered one verse where it's metaphorical, yes. Where we have reason to believe that it's metaphorical, because if we take it in its literal sense, it won't add up with one, intellectual reasoning, and two, it won't add up with other verses of the Quran. And Ayatullah Subhani will say this as we go on as well. Right after this actually, he says, in addition to reason number 1 and number 2, for this ayah, this verse, meaning that they are expecting the blessings of their Lord, in addition to the 2 reasons we mentioned, there's a third reason, and that is when we want to do tafsir of other verses, when we want to do tafsir of verses, we have to look at other verses as well, and make sure the verses read with each other. Or else, we have to reinterpret one of them that goes against other verses. For here, for sure, seeing God with the eyeball is not a possibility because it was already mentioned why. It leads to deficiency in God's essence. Even in Yawmul Qiyamah, being able to see Him with a physical eye is not going to be possible. It's not like I'm going to see Him, oh, this is God. Why? Because those three things that he said in the beginning, Ayatullah Subhani, will come into the picture. Okay, I see God, that means He's there, not here. Well, He's here too though. He has to be illuminated enough for me to see Him. If it's dark, I can't see Him. And He has to be in a place for me to see Him. All of these go against Him being God. So even in Yawmul Qiyamah, if He gives us physical eyes, we're not going to be seeing Him. So this is what pushes us, Brother Shuja, pushes us to know that this verse is probably it's a metaphorical one. Okay, this is the verse that's being metaphorical. This doesn't mean everything in the Quran is now metaphorical just because one of these verses was metaphorical. No. So all these other verses, we take them in their true meaning. But at the same time, this has been explained, the Quran has been written just like every other book in every other language. Sometimes things are used metaphorically as well. Sometimes it helps in the understanding of things. Sometimes it stresses on things. I can always say, if I've said something to you 10 times and repeated it to you 10 times and I'm upset about it when you're asking me for the 11th time, I can either say, I told you this 10 times already, right? Or to highlight how upset I am about this, I can tell you, hey man, I've told you this 1,000,000 times. 1,000,000 times is not true literally, but it's exaggeration here. These are different things that are used in literature to highlight certain things, to underline certain things, to bolden them in the minds of people. God is no exception when it comes to speaking to us in our languages, in the way we speak to each other. We exaggerate sometimes, we use a figurative language sometimes, so on and so forth. Okay? So the Quran will have some verses sometimes that are like that as well. We have to understand that. Doesn't mean everything now in the Quran is metaphorical just because 10 verses out of 100 verses in the Quran are metaphorical. Okay. After all of this and him explaining these three reasons for why what is meant by ila rabbiha nadhira does not mean that you can see Him on the Day of Judgment. Three reasons he brought. What were they again? Very quickly. Number one was the Quran first attributes the sight of these people to their faces, not their eyes. Number one. Number two, as we look at the verses that come after these verses, it's talking about how people are expecting punishment. And the same wording is used, but they're expecting punishment now. So that must be what is meant by those who are seeing their Lord, meaning expecting something from their Lord, which is blessings. That was the second reasoning. Third reasoning was, hey, if we take this verse to mean that they're actually seeing God, it won't read with other verses of the Quran as well. Okay? Yeah, it's a tough one though. It's a tough one in the sense that, yes, some people might actually, even in the Shia Mufassirin, some people might believe that, no, we can see God on the Day of Judgment. Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say that this is something everyone accepts, but you can be sure that I think mainstream mufassirs and those who do tafsir of Quran, that's what they think. So these are the three reasons for why God can't be seen on the Day of Judgment, according to that verse, ila rabbiha nadhira. Alright. In the end, Ayatullah Subhani, he talks about something else. To be honest with you guys, I didn't really understand why he even explains this, says this. And it's something on the side. That's what he says. And that's why he uses the word, it also becomes clear from the above arguments that such, so and so and so and so. But I don't want to even get into that. I think it's very confusing and it's unnecessary for our discussion here. Okay, I'm not going to go into the next article. Because it's going to drag on. It's going to take a long time to cover it. I'm just going to, explain it, give an introduction to it, and we'll leave the rest for next week. As I said, next week is going to be April. Yeah. So I want everyone to look out for the flyer that we're going to be putting out with the schedule of these sessions. Which, alhamdulillah, these sessions are wonderful. I thank everyone for tuning in because wherever I go, I'll have a few people who'll tell me, oh yeah, we follow that, you know. We can't watch it live, but we tune in later and we watch it. We listen to it on our way to work. I put the audio of all of these, I put them in a Telegram channel that I have as well. So people who want to listen to it, they can listen to it. So alhamdulillah, we're getting good feedback, and I thank all of you for that. So just to give an introduction to next week's topic. We're done with sifat thubutiyah, right? Affirmative qualities that itself was divided into two parts. The sifat al-dhat and sifat al-fi'l, qualities of action versus qualities of essence. That we were done with. Today we finish a sifat al-salbiyah, the negated qualities of God. And he gave just one example, the visibility of God and the capacity to be seen. That capacity to be seen of God, and how these are qualities that can never be attributed to God because they lead to deficiency and dependency. And dependency, I don't want to sound like I said independency. They lead to imperfection and dependency, right? Those are sifat as-salbiyah, the qualities you cannot. Those are the qualities that are negated from God. That bigger chapter is done now. Okay. Then we're going to move on into those qualities that if it was just us and our minds, we would never even know that this quality existed, this quality of God. The way God describes himself sometimes in the Quran, for example, when he talks about how he has a hand, how he has a face, how he has an eye, and so on and so forth. These sifat, these qualities, they're referred to sifat khabariyah. And to be honest with you, in other conventional theology books, I have not seen this category, right? Or a title like this given to a category of God's qualities, to be honest with you. So this might be he might have coined this, I don't know. And I might be totally wrong, but I'm just being honest, I haven't seen this before. But what he means by it, informative, he calls it, the translation says here, informative attributes, which I disagree with this equivalent, I'm sorry. Informative usually means that is something that is informing you. I think what sifat khabari means is, it means the informed attributes of God. Those attributes which God has informed us of himself, or else we would have never been able to figure it out on our own. We were able to figure out the knowledge of God, the power of God, the truthfulness of God. All these things we were able to figure out on our own. The fact that God cannot be seen, that's something we can figure out on our own with our mind. But then there are some things, if God didn't call himself those things, we would have never thought of that. Like God has a hand, God has an eye. But you'll see, and you could probably guess right now, that most of these attributes are metaphorical once again. When God speaks about himself, he tells us that, look, I'm going to explain myself to you, I'm going to describe myself to you, but at the end of the day, your understanding of me is still limited. The words that I use to describe myself still are not accurate, but there's no other better words. And that has to do with our limitedness. And he's unlimited. We don't have words for something that's unlimited. Something that can really denote to us his attributes in their unlimited form. Because at the end of the day, we're all limited beings. Okay, so that's an introduction to the next chapter. It starts with article 43. I thank all of you for tuning in once again. Inshallah till next week. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.